I'm Elizabeth Ray.
I'm Alistair Stevens.
And Tom Cruise is Charlie Babbitt in Rain Man.
When we started this project to watch every Tom Cruise movie in chronological order, I have to admit, there were a few that I was not looking forward to. There were a few that I knew would be challenging. And Rain Man was really the first one on the list that I was dreading outright.
I was going to use the word dread. Yeah, you were dreading Rain Man.
I was absolutely wrong. I was categorically wrong. Not to jump ahead to the end of the episode, but I was absolutely wrong about this one. I had watched this film when I was maybe 15, somewhere around there, and hated it.
Yeah.
Hated what Hoffman was doing, hated what Cruise was doing, and just decided that this was a bad film that I'd never wanted to watch again.
Yeah, it's not a young person's film.
It's not, no, particularly not for me at the age of 15, for sure. But yeah. Had you seen this film before?
No, I'd only seen a couple of sequences, probably when it was just like playing on TV at some point when I was a kid. And so I was familiar with certain scenes I had forgotten about, but then remembered the dancing sequence.
Sure.
So that was a real, oh yeah, I've seen this before.
It's a very Elizabeth sequence.
Yeah. And I loved it. I really did. And I think the toothpick scene I had also seen before.
Sure.
But that's really it.
The toothpick scene is emblematic of this film. It is iconic.
Yeah,
of this film,
and I'm not even sure if I had seen it because people had referenced it.
Sure.
I happen to know and to have seen a little bit of the doctor's office sequence because, as I mentioned before, that's shot here in Guthrie, Oklahoma. So it came up in one of my film classes as, here are some movies that we did in Oklahoma and here are some classic scenes. And
yes.
But that's it.
It's an odd choice to shoot part of this film in Oklahoma, honestly.
Oh?
Well, Oklahoma's not terribly indicative of there's a lot of Midwest out there, and Oklahoma's not terribly indicative of what the Midwest really looks like.
Oh, you think so?
It stood out to me, I must admit.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
It stood out to me both ways. It stood out to me that Oklahoma's an odd choice, and also the shots of Oklahoma that we use in this film don't really look that much like Oklahoma.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because you almost want to see rolling cornfields or something.
Yeah.
And the Oklahoma landscape, while being, of course, mostly flat, and the portions that they showed mostly flat, aren't like recognizable crops. We grow things like milo, which is something I know because I finally asked somebody at the gas station after I had driven by like the 18th field of this random crop that I could not identify and didn't look like much. Could have been, some kind of wildflower, or not even a wildflower, but some kind of seeded weed. And it's for feed for cows.
Sure.
So it's not iconic in the way that cornfields or wheat fields would be.
And this, in case you're wondering, dear listener, is why we've never been hired by the Oklahoma Tourist Board to record commercials for them. Because Oklahoma, I mean, yeah.
There's some beautiful landscape in Oklahoma. There really is. It's just not, the kind that you see driving on a country road in the middle of Oklahoma.
Though I will say the cinematography in this film goes a long way toward making those shots just consistently spectacular. I think the cinematography throughout really impressive.
Yeah, and we both love a road trip movie, right?
Of course
so
we
it's
do.
Nice to see it.
Yes. And a Vegas heist movie, which we get for,
Sure.
a couple minutes right there in the heart of this film. I could have stood a little more of that, I'm not going to lie.
I agree.
We should talk about the elephant in the room, though. We should talk about the treatment of illness in fiction, which is what makes Rain Man such an important film, such an influential film, but also means that it is somewhat more dated than we would hope. Less dated than I feared, I'll admit that, but more dated even than we would hope. We want, at the very least, I think, to make our fictional worlds diverse and complex, to reflect the diversity and the complexity of the real world. And good-hearted people that we are, we want to promote diversity and inclusivity in our fiction and in our production, in the industry itself. But the representation of illness on screen is difficult because so much of what makes illness complex, what makes illness realistic, is internal. But we also don't want to slip into just reams of exposition about how a particular person feels or how a particular illness manifests itself. And that's without even touching on, the ever-evolving language of illness. Right. That's particularly relevant here. The neurodevelopmental disorder commonly called autism, including the forms which used to be called Kanner syndrome and Asperger syndrome and childhood disintegrative disorder, they are now, as of last year, properly and formally referred to as autism spectrum disorder, ASD, or autism spectrum condition, ASC. That's the up-to-date language as of last year. Obviously, this is an unscripted podcast, and if we slip up in the span of the next 90 minutes to 2 hours, however long we're talking about Rain Man, then A, we apologize, and B, we would like it understood that that comes from a place of ignorance, not a place of a lack of respect or a lack of care or compassion.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we have to frame our discussion of this film like this, of course, is that this film is most notable for Dustin Hoffman's portrayal of Ray. This was, I think, a genuinely well-intentioned attempt to move the needle regarding the public perception of the quote-unquote autistic savant archetype.
Mm.
And it did, as Carl Knights wrote in The Guardian back in 2018, quote, "Before Rain Man, there was no popular conception of what autism looked like among the public or on screen. At that point, autism was an abstraction, understood only by dedicated parents or specialized clinicians." End quote. And absolutely, through the 1990s, Rain Man becomes a shorthand for, well, all kinds of things, some of which are well-intentioned and some of which are absolutely not.
Yeah.
It also became a brickbat used to beat people who were different. And that's partly the problem here. I think that the film can get points for both being progressive and outdated.
Yeah.
How did you feel watching it here in 2023 as both a product of its time and a reflexive piece of commentary on our modern treatment of people with ASD?
I was mostly impressed with everyone who was playing physicians or therapists or nurse aides or whatever you would want to call it at Walbrook itself and even later in the film. I really liked the language initially that the doctor said about Raymond not processing or expressing emotions in the traditional way. I thought that was a really lovely way of putting that, even today. So especially by 1988 standards. And then I like that we just let Charlie Babbitt be a jackass about it, and we feel like, wow, this guy's being a jackass about it. I think that says a lot.
Yeah, the ability to have that character explore the boundaries of Raymond's experience and Raymond's ability to communicate that experience, I think is really strong screenwriting, and it takes an enormous amount of on-screen charm to be both that guy and also drive the action of the film without the audience just turning against you completely. I think Cruise walks a tightrope in this film.
Yeah. We really need the girlfriend. Susanna, is that her name?
Yes.
We really need Susanna pointing out just what a dick he's being. And then ultimately leaving, as she does and should, so that he has to arc out of it himself. It's well done structurally.
Yes, though, as we'll discuss when we get there, I think the film does her a little dirty at the end by just dropping our interest in her. But you're right, that's not where the story is. She does serve a very useful narrative function and is, God knows, charming to watch on screen.
We love her, yes.
We do. Should we get into the trailer game and then get into our discussion of this film? It's my trailer game this week, so you dodged a bullet on that one.
Yeah, this will be maybe a tricky trailer game, but
I have an idea.
You.
I have, these things are improvised, but I have a notion of where this is going to go.
Excellent. Very smart.
It's December 18th, 1988, and it's time to get the gang back together. This time, we're taking the strip for all it's worth. Tom Cruise is the movie star. Valeria Golino is so hot. Dustin Hoffman is the Method Man. What critics are calling the heist film of the year, surrounded by 120 minutes of another film that's not the heist film of the year. Ring-a-ding-ding, baby. The strips never looked so good. This year, spent Christmas with Rain Man.
I do want more heist movie now that you mention it. I really do. Yeah, that is where the movie sings.
I think I cheated, but I'm comfortable with that.
You did cheat a little bit, but that's okay. Yeah.
The origins of Rain Man go back to 1984, when screenwriter Barry Morrow meets Kim Peek, a 33-year-old mega savant who possessed congenital brain abnormalities and a genuinely incredible memory. Peek was capable of reading 2 books simultaneously, one with each eye, and could retain up to 90% of the book's content indefinitely. By the time of his death in 2009, it was estimated that he had complete recall of over 12,000 books.
Wow.
Morrow had already written Bill, a TV movie in which Mickey Rooney plays a quote-unquote intellectually disabled man who leaves the institution where he has spent his entire life in order to experience the world. I can only imagine that film is somewhat less sensitive than this
Mickey
film.
Rooney alone.
Right?
Yes.
Inspired by Kim Peek and the real-life inspiration for the character of Bill, Morrow begins to write Rain Man. Kim Peek we should note, in the spirit of sensitivity, did not in fact have ASD. Rather, he was diagnosed later in life with FG syndrome, which is a truly awful genetic disorder of the X chromosome, so it only affects men, and it leads to congenital brain defects in the corpus callosum, the part of the brain that bridges the two lobes of the brain.
Okay.
So I was doing some medical reading, and it's pretty harrowing stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
MGM producer Roger Birnbaum is interested and picks up the script. The studio, naturally, checks if real-life brothers Dennis and Randy Quaid are interested in playing the leads.
Wow, okay, I could see that.
But much to the relief of everyone, they pass. The script is instead sent to Dustin Hoffman and Bill Murray, though at that point, Murray is going to play Ray, and Dustin Hoffman is going to play Charlie.
That's a really different movie that I'm not sure I like.
It's a super different film. Yeah.
How do you feel about Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson?
In general?
Well, this whole thing now, where it's like, oh, maybe they were brothers this whole time. And we're all like, have you seen this?
I'd forgotten that. Yes, you're right.
I could see a Matthew McConaughey, Woody Harrelson.
Asterisk citation needed. I think that Woody Harrelson would give a different kind of performance.
Mm-hmm. He can get those real puppy eyes going in a way that I think Hoffman can't.
Yes, but I think that would be to the detriment of the character. I think that part
that's
of
smart.
what makes this film work is Hoffman's method actor commitment to the bit. That he never breaks, that we never have a moment of anything other than Raymond's complete, emotional integrity and consistency. I think that
well, he's
works.
Certainly, I think, a better actor, forgive me, but yeah.
I think Woody Harrelson would also agree with you.
I think you're probably right.
Bill Murray's an interesting idea, though, particularly at that point in his career. But this is 88.
He's become such a trope himself. Like he's become a caricature.
For sure, but you have to remember the Bill Murray that we're dealing with in 88 is the Bill Murray that just left Hollywood to go and study at the Sorbonne following the success of Ghostbusters. He took himself out.
I'm sorry, what?
This is true. This is a true thing about Bill Murray. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. You know so many things.
How do you know so many things?
I was thinking, how do you know so much about swallows?
The other actor considered for the role of Charlie was Mel Gibson, another person we can be glad passed on this script. Let's talk about Dustin Hoffman. He is born in LA in 1937 to Harry and Lillian Hoffman, which makes him 25 years older than Cruise.
I wondered. It seems too old.
Which is actually, no, that's pretty much the split in the movie. It's closer to 20 years, but it's around the right kind of age difference, yeah. Hoffman's father was a prop supervisor at Columbia and worked in the industry for much of his life before leaving to become a furniture designer and manufacturer toward the end of his career.
Wow, that's cool.
Hoffman's family is, of course, Jewish, though his upbringing is non-religious. He has said in several interviews through the years that he didn't even know his family was Jewish until he was 10 years old.
Sure.
After high school, he enrolls in Santa Monica College to study medicine, but leaves after a year to become an actor, against the advice of his Aunt Pearl, who told him that he would never make it in movies because he wasn't good looking enough.
Wow, thanks, Aunt Pearl.
Savage.
We've all got one.
His very first acting role is on stage at the Pasadena Playhouse opposite Gene Hackman, and the two would be close friends for more than half a century. Indeed, Hoffman, Hackman, and Robert Duvall lived together in New York through the 60s while they all struggled to find work. Hoffman struggling more even than the other two, and oftentimes sleeping on the kitchen floor when there wasn't another alternative.
Wow.
Hoffman finally gives up. He decides that he should teach instead. But then he studies at the Actors Studio and becomes a method actor, which really works for him. And he works consistently through the 60s, mostly on stage, building a formidable reputation. In 66, he meets the brilliant Mike Nichols, who wants to cast Hoffman in The Apple Tree, but has to change his mind when he learns that Hoffman cannot sing. Like, not even a little bit, apparently. That part goes to Alan Alda instead and really jumpstarts his career.
I've never heard of this. The Apple Tree?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know this one.
I don't know it either.
Wow, okay.
Only by reputation.
All right.
Nichols remembers Hoffman, though, and casts him the following year in a little underground movie called The Graduate. Hoffman was 29 years old. By the time he turns 30, he has an Oscar nomination for Best Actor.
Wow. He's not playing anything like 29 in that movie, right? Well,
mid-20s, though,
like
yeah.
25.
I mean, he's a graduate,
College graduate,
so,
but
24,
still.
25
okay,
maybe? Yeah.
Right. The Graduate, of course, we have to watch in film school. That's one of the big new Hollywood movies.
Of course, yeah.
Do you like it?
She said, throwing me a softball over the plate. No, dear, I don't.
I don't like
You
it
don't
either.
either.
I
I know.
really want to.
This
I'm
is a safe
supposed
space.
to. Safe spaces. I don't think The Graduate is good. Yeah.
You know, I think this is true of a lot of the early New Hollywood films in particular, is that the whole idea of New Hollywood is that we are not going to play safe. We are not going to do what has been done before. We are going to be experimental and adventurous.
Sure.
And thereby influential for decades to come. But when you are being experimental and adventurous, your films are sometimes not going to work.
Yeah.
No one can argue that The Graduate isn't an incredibly important film.
Right. Absolutely.
But yeah, I don't enjoy watching it at all.
Yeah, wouldn't watch again. Had to watch for a grade. That's fine. Glad that I saw it so that, I could learn or whatever it was. But yeah.
Hoffman is, though, grateful to Nichols for taking the risk on him. In a 2008 Vanity Fair interview, he said, quote, "I don't know of another instance of a director at the height of his powers who would take a chance and cast someone like me in that part. It took tremendous courage." Mike Nichols, a legend. What's strange, though, is that after The Graduate and after that Oscar nomination, Hoffman's career doesn't really take off. He turns down film roles returning to New York and the Broadway stage, less than a year after The Graduate, for which he was paid $20,000.
Oh my God.
He files for unemployment benefits in New York, which helps to explain why, a year later, he would somewhat compromise his principles and return to the big screen in John Schlesinger's adaptation of James Leo Herlihy's novel Midnight Cowboy. This is the I'm Walking Here movie.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I don't think it's probably for me.
I suspect not, yes. That film earns Hoffman his second Academy Award nomination. From there, he goes from strength to strength. He stars in Little Big Man in 1970, Straw Dogs in 71, and Lenny, directed by Bob Fosse, based on the life of Lenny Bruce in 1974, which gets him his third Oscar nomination. In 76, he appears in All the President's Men opposite Robert Redford and in William Goldman's Marathon Man opposite Laurence Olivier and Roy Scheider.
Wow.
In 79, he appears with Meryl Streep in Kramer vs. Kramer, for which he finally wins an Academy Award. 3 years later, he gives a career-defining performance in Sidney Pollack's Tootsie. Another film that you ought not to watch, you guys. Another film that is very influential in its time, but I do not think has held up. He appears opposite Warren Beatty in Elaine May's famous disaster Ishtar in 1987. And then after Rain Man, he'll appear as Mumbles in Dick Tracy in 1990. He will play the villain in Hook, I forget his name, in 1991. And of course, dozens more. Wag the Dog in 97, for which he receives his most recent Best Actor nomination. He's in Sphere in 1998. Did you ever see Sphere?
No, but I remember
That's
it.
a great film. I mean, it's a bad film, but it's really enjoyable.
Sure.
That is also, once again, directed by Barry Levinson, in fact, the guy who directs Rain Man. Yeah. He's in Jon Favreau's Chef in 2014 and fulfills what seems like it must have been an ancient prophecy by finally working with Noah Baumbach and appearing in Meyerowitz Stories in 2017. Overall, where are you on Hoffman?
I have to say, I've only seen not even a handful of the films you just mentioned, and some of them I've never even heard of. So I grew up on Hook, obviously. So that was my Dustin Hoffman.
You know, he's so method that he actually had a pirate ship in Neverland for like that whole summer.
I love it.
This is my problem with Hoffman, is that I don't like method actors.
Yeah,
I don't think that the method is, well, it's not in a very real sense acting.
Right, yeah.
Is the thing.
It seems unhealthy. It's certainly tied to horrific mental health problems with actors that I love and respect, or loved and respected. After
yes.
method took their lives, basically.
Terrible, terrible things being done to the co-stars of method actors through the 60s, 70s, 80s in particular.
Pardon me, but fuck that noise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, it's extreme. Just auto-gaslighting, right? Like gaslighting yourself into believing that you can be a different kind of actor than you are seems innately destructive. And honestly,
certainly we get extraordinary performances from some method actors. I do want to say that. I want to say that,
and I would count this as one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
I think this is a real highlight. I also do enjoy Hoffman in some other things. I think Kramer versus Kramer is one of the big reasons that I wanted to do a Meryl Streep series.
Yeah, I've never seen that one, but I do want to
do that someday soon. Yeah, I think there's a lot there to enjoy. And certainly some of his late era work where he is a little more playful, a little more connected to his own on-screen persona and his own kind of legend, right? I think there's some really interesting work there too. Since we're talking about the cast, shall we spend a moment in the company of Valeria Golino?
I would spend every moment in the company of Valeria Golino. Oh my God.
Just the most beautiful person.
I really think so. Yeah, just astonishing.
While watching this film, there are I don't know how many, a dozen moments where she's on screen and you're looking right at her, and then she will lift her eyes and the light will catch them, and you will just fall in love with her all over again.
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, she's extraordinary. She's in a Netflix series now. Well, rather, it's an Italian series that Netflix is airing called The Lying Life of Adults. I'm not sure if it's still streaming right now, but I watched quite a bit of that, mostly for her, because she's just so arresting and extraordinary. So she's still doing great work, I'm happy to say.
Yeah.
And looking just as gorgeous as ever.
I started watching that series and realized that there were so many interesting things happening around the languages that are used, because it's in Italian and it's in Neapolitan, which is this very specific subdialect.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an area of real interest for me, but I am not skilled in the Italian. So I wanted to do like Duolingo or something over the summer just to give myself a grounding in what was happening. And then, of course, didn't, because really, who has the time to learn anything these days?
Facts.
Galino is born in 1965 in Naples, Italy, to an Italian father and a Greek mother. After her parents' divorce, she spends her childhood shuttling between Athens and Sorrento.
Wow.
Not so bad, really. At the age of 11, she is diagnosed with scoliosis and later has to have a steel rod implanted in her back.
Wow.
As a part of her care, she spent 6 months in a hospital in Chicago, which is where she learned English. She becomes a model. She appears in TV commercials. When she's 17, she is cast in her first movie and drops out of high school, breaking the pattern that we've established over the last few weeks of people dropping out of college before they complete their studies. In 1985, she wins a Golden Globe Award for Breakout Actress, but later that year, she is involved in a car crash, which displaces the rod in her spine, and it has to be removed, and she is bedridden for 5 months. So she cannot really capitalize on the buzz surrounding that Golden Globe win. In 1986, she appears in Francesco Maselli's film, forgive my Italian, Storia d'amore, which wins her the Best Actress prize at Venice. Shortly thereafter, she moves to the United States. She appears in the Pee Wee Herman movie, Big Top Pee Wee.
Formative.
And in Rain Man in 1988. She appears unforgettably in Hot Shots in 1991.
Also formative.
And in Hot Shots Part 2 in 1993. She's in Leaving Las Vegas in 95. She's in Escape from LA in 96. In the last 30 years, she has averaged, mind you, a little more than 2 films per year.
Wow.
She
Good
is
for
just
her.
always working, in addition to making her own films, too. She was the second choice behind Julia Roberts for Pretty Woman, and the second choice behind Julia Roberts for Flatliners, which is surely enough to make you a little resentful at that point. And she was offered the Jamie Lee Curtis role in True Lies and turned it down. What a world we could have lived in.
Yeah, interesting. I do love Jamie Lee Curtis in that movie, though.
Me too, yeah. No, she's extraordinary, but,
she is.
you know.
She's great. She's funny.
In 2013, she directs her first feature film, Honey, which I guess in the Italian is Miele. You studied Italian.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Miele? Does that sound right?
Miele, yeah.
Ah, so much better than me. Which has won a number of respectable awards, including a special mention at Cannes. She is also in this 2000 Rodrigo Garcia movie, Rodrigo Garcia, the son of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, interestingly. This film is Things You Can Tell Just by Looking at Her, which I have never heard of.
I have heard of that
Really?
because I think it's such a great title, but I couldn't tell you anything about it.
It's a great title and a knockout cast. Glenn Close, Cameron Diaz, Callista Flockhart, Amy Brenneman, all circa 2000. And if that's not enough for you, you are sitting there looking unimpressed. So I'm also going to add
unimpressed.
Look, I'll do this deal for you today. You can drive out of here in a brand new 2000 Rodrigo Garcia movie. Because Holly Hunter is also in that film.
Holly Hunter.
She won a Golden Globe for appearing in that film. So we definitely need to track that one
find it,
down.
yeah.
So, back to Rain Man. Hoffman gets the role, he signs up, and he begins, as is his way, to do his deep research, including meeting the aforementioned Kim Peek to study his mannerisms and physicality. And that is where we get into some dubious issues of what is being depicted in the film. We are playing fast and loose with what ASD is and what it is not. As previously mentioned, Kim Peek did not have ASD. So we are kind of pastiching a whole spectrum of disorders here in the performance. But I think in his defense, the specificity of his performance itself leaves us feeling like we are in very safe hands, I think.
I think so too. Yeah, it feels very sincere and very true to the individual of Raymond.
Yeah, I think so too. The studio casts crews, of course, opposite Hoffman, and the film is ready to go into production late in 1986, right around the time that The Color of Money is released. At that time, the movie is under the control of Martin Brest, who was hot property after directing the first Beverly Hills Cop movie in 1984. Brest would later direct Midnight Run in 1988, Scent of a Woman in 1992, Meet Joe Black in 1998,
Ooh, I like that one.
and then kill his career stone dead with the absolutely calamitous Ben Affleck-Jennifer Lopez movie Gigli, which took
I haven't thought about that movie in decades.
No one has.
Wow.
It took $7.2 million at the box office off of a budget of $75 million.
Oh, no.
It is remarkable that Ben Affleck has a career for a number of reasons, quite frankly, but that's a big one.
Wow.
Didn't kill his career, did kill Martin Brest's career,
Wow.
unfortunately.
Okay.
In 1986, though, MGM isn't feeling confident. They hire Michael Bortman to rewrite the script, though he doesn't end up getting any credit. They believe in the potential of the script, but not in the draft in front of them. Martin Brest is replaced with Steven Spielberg. He too, though, leaves the project because he promised his buddy George that he would direct Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Better project to work on, I'd say.
I would say so.
Yeah.
Sidney Pollack takes over, only to be replaced by Barry Levinson early in 1988. 9 weeks before production is due to start. Levinson comes on so late. At some point around this time, and the history is a little tangled, screenwriter Ronald Bass is brought in for another rewrite. He's generally credited with the script as it appears on screen, and went to the WGA for arbitration, asking that Morrow be removed from the screenwriting credit and instead given story by.
Sure.
But the WGA decided that they would both get screenplay credits, even though apparently nothing, or let's say little, of that original draft remains on screen.
Interesting.
Let's talk about Barry Levinson then, because he is hot property in 1988.
Okay.
He's born in 1942. He starts directing in the early 1980s. He meets with some success off of Young Sherlock Holmes in 1985.
I love Young Sherlock Holmes.
I looked at you at that moment because I knew that you would love Young Sherlock Holmes. That, though, is just a prologue to his enormous 1987 success with Good Morning Vietnam, the movie that gets Robin Williams the first of his 3 Academy Award nominations. That thing is a cultural phenomenon.
Never seen it.
That would be a really interesting experiment.
Yeah?
Yeah. I have no idea. It was so much a part of my cultural fabric when I was,
Really?
10, 11, 12 years old. It was quoted all the time. It's one of those films. The first act is just hilarious. It is Robin Williams just unchained.
Uh-huh.
And it's extremely magnetic. It takes a dramatic turn. We're kind of presaging the rest of Williams' career and the ways that he would interact with drama and comedy, oftentimes somewhat uncomfortably, the one alongside the other. But that first act was so pivotal to my kind of comic sensibility at that time.
Wow. Okay.
Be interesting to go back and watch it.
It would be.
But regardless of how it stands up now, that movie was an absolute phenomenon, and that combination of comedy and drama makes Levinson, I think, the obvious choice for Rain Man. When Levinson comes onto the production, the first thing he does is start cutting back the script. Brest, Spielberg, and Pollack had all added to that original concept, making it just flashier and in some ways less substantial, more ambitious, but less anchored in the reality of the relationship between these two brothers. Levinson cuts it back to the bone, saying, quote, "This is 2 schmucks in a car," end quote. I'm amazed they didn't use that for the tagline, personally.
I do get it, though. Yeah.
I think is a really strong move. I think it makes the film what it is, but the consequence of this decision is that 9 weeks before production, they have a script that has enormous holes in it, like literal plot holes. How do they get from this spot to this spot? We don't know. There's nothing on the page. This is further complicated because 8 weeks before the start of principal photography, with the script hanging by a thread, the WGA goes on strike.
Yep.
Principal photography wraps in the middle of May. The strike continues until the beginning of August. So without writers on set and without a complete script to shoot from, Levinson chooses to trust his actors and their sense of the characters. They, after all, have been working on this film far longer than he has.
I guess so.
Hoffman has been studying and perfecting this character for more than 2 years by the time we start shooting. So when questions are asked about the plot, why, for example, Charlie doesn't take Raymond back to the institution, they come up with answers themselves, and they shoot scenes that are collaboratively conceived and improvised.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that accounts for some of the repetition in the script
I
that
think you're
doesn't
absolutely
make
right.
sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it
Okay.
also gives us these moments of kind of A to B linearity.
Mm-hmm.
Levinson decides during the shoot that just driving on highways is going to be boring. So they stage the car crash and have Raymond adversely react to it,
Right. Mm-hmm.
so that Charlie decides to take side roads instead. And suddenly the film
Which are
is just
better.
visually much more interesting.
Much better.
But
Mm-hmm.
that was just an A to B resolution to a problem that emerged as they were moving forward.
Wow. Interesting.
They shoot for 5 weeks in the great city of Cincinnati, Ohio, where I used to live,
Yeah.
and in Newport, Kentucky, which is just across the water. Newport's a very, very cool town on the other side of the Ohio
I really
River.
loved the shot we got of the bridge, and is that the Ohio River?
Yes, when they're in the bank looking out through those fantastic
Looked
windows behind them.
so cool.
Yeah.
I was like, is Ohio actually cool?
Ohio in general, I would say no. Cincinnati in general, I would say no. But the Riverbank District, downtown Cincinnati, and then, as I say, across the bridge in Newport, Kentucky is, yeah, it's pretty cool.
All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
They then come to Oklahoma and shoot for 3 weeks in the city, though I couldn't see any of the city.
I didn't see anything I recognized except downtown Guthrie.
Yeah, and they shoot in the small town of Guthrie, which is about, an hour north of where we are here. They wrap up the shoot in Vegas and in Palm Springs, California. I should mention the cinematographer on this project, John Seal, an Australian expat who comes to the US to shoot Witness in 1985. He goes on to shoot Dead Poets Society shortly after this film.
Loved it.
The Firm, so we'll get to circle back around to him. He shoots The Talented Mr. Ripley. He shoots Mad Max Fury Road and 3,000 Years of Longing with George Miller.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and perhaps most notably, of course, wins a cinematography Oscar for Anthony Minghella's The English Patient.
Oh, beautiful
Which I don't think we've ever talked about, but you must love The English Patient,
I love The English Patient.
Yes.
Of course I do. Yes.
This is our first real opportunity to talk about a phenomenon that has been a part of Hollywood for as long as there have been studios, but which really hits a peak in the late 1980s and continues in a similar form to the present day. This is our time to talk about Hollywood accounting.
Oh, no.
Basically, the idea is this. Movies are not produced in a vacuum, but rather as a part of a studio ecosystem. Multiple films are in pre-production, production, and post-production phases all at the same time. So your movie, Elizabeth, gets a budget of $30 million.
Wow.
But
I like this universe.
but part of that budget is going to go to the construction of a new soundstage that will then be used for other movies.
Right.
And it will count as an asset in the future. Let's say that soundstage costs $1 million, but over the next 10 years, 8 other movies are going to shoot on that stage. Your studio is going to charge maintenance and tech and rental fees to its own movies that come out to, say, $750,000 a movie. So that's $6 million in future spending that is going to take place on a soundstage that you are building for your film. So in a sense, isn't all of that money kind of yours? Aren't you, in a way, spending all of that money? Look, if you take a long enough lunch, and if you are casual enough about the truth, then you can move that money around. And that happens all the time. And that's just production costs. If you throw in marketing and distribution and cast and crew and contract percentages that you give to your key players and key actors, if you count overheads and interest payments on what was borrowed to fund the film in the first place, and interest payments on the balance that might still be outstanding at the end of the film and its production, if you're counting all of the hideous costs associated with employing a couple of hundred people for 2 months or 4 months or 8 months or, much longer if you're Stanley Kubrick, if you're talking about legal fees and you're talking about insurance and so on and so on and so on, you can get into some very complicated accounting. The upshot of this is that successful films can continue to have extra costs attached to them and extra income sequestered away in other businesses. For example, DVD sales. You can hive off the DVD side of your company so that income never counts against the money made back by your film. And all of these shenanigans can bring us to a point where a riotously successful film can never turn a profit. This is true, perhaps most famously, of Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi has never turned a profit according to its accountants.
That's so crazy.
The Tim Burton Batman film never turned a profit. Forrest Gump, one of the biggest films of the 90s, never turned a profit. Brilliantly, when the writer of the original novel was approached to offer the option for his sequel novel so that they could make Gumpin' 2 still Gumpin', he refused, saying that it would be irresponsible of him to offer an option for a book that was a sequel to a film that never made any money.
Wow.
basically denying that studio
Yeah.
$1 billion.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Close to your heart, according to Warner Brothers, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, a movie which took more than $1 billion at the international box office, somehow lost $167 million.
That's insane. Okay.
It's untrue, is what it is. On the one hand, to speak in the defense of these terrible companies, you can kind of justify this kind of accounting because studios have always supported less well-performing films with their blockbuster hits. The key to a successful studio, in a sense, is to have enough hits that you make money and enough prestige that you're still respectable and few enough disasters that you don't go under.
Yeah.
On the other hand, of course, in the real world, this technique is usually used to avoid paying money to people who have worked on your film.
Mm-hmm.
This is exactly the same strategy, by the way, that here in 2023 leads these companies to gut their online catalogs. It is better from a business perspective for Warner to write and shoot and edit an entire Batgirl film and then cancel it, because then they can count that $30 million budget as a loss. In fact, they can probably claim several times that $30 million budget as a loss.
Awful.
It is fundamentally dishonest.
Mm-hmm.
And though we've just come through WGA strikes and SAG-AFTRA strikes, there is still a major reckoning ahead of us.
Wow.
I mention all of this to put into context the fact that Rain Man was shot for $25 million. It was the highest grossing film of the year. It took $354.8 million at the global box office. And that is in 1988 money. That is almost $1 billion in today's money.
Mm-hmm.
It is the most successful film in the history of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, a studio founded in 1924. And in 1992, MGM claimed that the film had lost $30 million.
That's just ridiculous. Wow.
The story of this is enchanting in its stupid complexity. It is wild. Technically, MGM doesn't even produce Rain Man because it is produced by UA, by United Artists.
Yeah.
Though United Artists had been bought by MGM in 1981. They merge into MGM UA in 1983, only to split apart again following a restructuring in 1985, at which point they are now independent production wings, essentially owned by the same umbrella company. Shortly thereafter, they're bought by Ted Turner and TBS in a deal that involves selling the UA back catalog to the former owners of UA. The deal goes through for $1.5 billion. TBS then immediately buys back that UA catalog for another $500 million. This effectively kills UA as a company. Then a year later, TBS sells MGM, killing off that company. And UA announces from the ashes a return to film production, now renamed MGM UA Communication Company, the awful logo for which appears at the beginning of Rain Man.
Yeah.
All of that in the space of like 6 years.
Gosh.
I could go on, and God knows some of you at home are thinking I've already gone on and on. But having companies pay other companies, which are independent suppliers or are distributors, but are also part of the same corporate structure, but are also assets in their own right, but also used to be the same company, but are now very different companies, but are run by the same board. All of this is just one tactic that can be used to obfuscate these financial dealings. Let's put all of that aside.
Yeah.
Rain Man was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Original Screenplay, Art Direction, Cinematography, Editing, and Score at the Academy Awards.
Score, huh?
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a minute because wow. It wins Picture, Director, and Actor for Hoffman and Screenplay, making it the most successful awards movie of Cruise's entire career.
Interesting.
Even though he does not win at
No.
this point. It's the second most successful movie of Hoffman's career after Kramer versus Kramer. It is, of course, also credited with moving the needle in the public perception of ASD, so much so that, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Rain Man becomes a functional shorthand for autistic savants through the 1990s. The downside to that is that in real life, fewer than 1 in 200 people with ASD are savants. So it really restricts and limits the public understanding of what ASD is.
Yeah.
This film is also to blame for the common misconception that counting cards is illegal in Las Vegas. Counting cards is not illegal in Las Vegas. Counting cards is not illegal anywhere. You can go and count cards all day long if you like. What's worse, perhaps, is that the casinos don't need to make a law against counting cards because they can kick you out for any reason
whenever they want.
Charge you with trespass.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just remember that the next time you go to Vegas and are misbehaving. I can only imagine that lawyers in Vegas make so much money.
You would think so.
As I mentioned in the trailer game, this movie is released on December 16th, 1988. Just a heartwarming Christmas movie. It is released to a mixed critical response, which I found really interesting, and a modest box office take too. That opening weekend, it only brings in $7 million. Legendary New York critic Pauline Kael thunderously hammers the movie, calling it, quote, wet kitsch, and saying that Hoffman, quote, humps one note on a piano for 2 hours and 11 minutes.
Oh my God, that's scathing.
Compliment sandwich for Pauline Kael, okay? Pauline Kael was incredibly influential and opened many, many doors to female critics in New York and further afield. Middle part of the sandwich, Pauline Kael was not my favorite person and is often violently out of step with the movies that she reviews and is pursuing her own personal, social, and political agenda. Other side of the sandwich, other good bread compliment part, God, she can write like that.
Yep.
Humps one note on a piano for 2 hours and 11 minutes.
I should say the film is too long.
It is far too long.
It needs to be an hour 30.
Yes,
Yeah.
which I think is, I would even give it an hour 40.
Sure.
But you have to cut at least a half hour from this film for it. And I think that if you do, which you could trivially,
Yeah.
this would be an all-time classic.
Yeah.
As opposed to what it is, which is a really good curiosity, I think. Roger Ebert praised Hoffman, but Gene Siskel gave equal praise to Cruise's performance, crediting both with the success of the film. That is not a common or popular perspective. The critical perspective on this film at the time is very much in praise of Hoffman, and also Tom Cruise is there. And I think that that is unfair. I think that that is undeserved.
Yeah.
I am siding here with Gene Siskel, as I do too infrequently in my life, honestly. I'm siding with Siskel and recognizing, I think, that both of these performances are pitch perfect and absolutely necessary to the success of the film.
Yeah.
That modest opening week take that I mentioned increases by 25% for week 2 and then increases by 64% for week 3. This is excellent word of mouth. The film remains in theaters until the middle of June the following year, buoyed by its success at the Academy Awards. There's a really cute story here. There's some minor controversy about the release of the film. On February the 15th, 1989, MGM runs advertisements in newspapers in LA and New York, proudly proclaiming that Rain Man is an Academy Award nominee for Best Picture. The problem is that nominations list is not announced until later that morning.
Oh.
So there's speculation at the time that there is a leak from the Academy, which is scandalous. The Academy does not leak. But ultimately, it's decided that MGM were just really, really confident about the film's chances. That success, by the way, sets a pattern for the Best Actor award for more than 30 years. Since Hoffman, roughly half of all the Best Actor award winners have won for portrayals of characters who have some kind of disability, which is, I mean, unpleasantly suggestive of a kind of exploitation and a kind of experiential tourism in the Academy's taste. And also, of course, these unpleasant connotations about representation, even before we get to the conversation about able-bodied actors playing characters with disabilities. Both Hoffman and Levinson, by the way, thanked Kim Peek on stage at the Oscars, and screenwriter Barry Morrow gave his Oscar on a permanent loan to Salt Lake City in the memory of Peek, and also personally funded the Peek Award, which is given by the Utah Film Center to filmmakers and subjects positively changing the public perception of people with disabilities. So the film has also had a very practical, positive influence. One more thing, because there's one person that we haven't mentioned, and it's not terribly important, but it will be in the years to come. The score for this film is written by the legendary Hans Zimmer.
Wild.
Though you would not know it.
No. And for a second, I thought it was Tangerine Dream again.
It sounds very synthy, very middle of the road, it's not even as good, not even as
exciting,
specific or unique as Tangerine Dream, right? It's just this synthy wail that continues through the entire film. Zimmer,
and the weird, like, cymbally drums, too. Yeah.
It feels very Angelo Badalamenti. It feels very Twin Peaksy of that era. Not like the classic throwback stuff that Badalamenti does in that series, but when Badalamenti is being modern, which he does infrequently.
Okay.
It sounds very similar. It's kind of got that
Mm.
synthy shallowness to it.
Yeah.
You know? Zimmer will be nominated for 10 Original Score Academy Awards and has won twice more for The Lion King in 1995. Not the songs, but the
No,
score.
I'm so glad you said that because it did remind me of The Lion King.
Really?
Yes. I know this sounds so random. I'm so glad now though, because what it specifically reminded me of. It's the background music for like level 2 or 3 of the Lion King Sega game when you're doing this whole thing where you're like throwing monkeys or monkeys are throwing you, I think. You're on the Sahara and it's this kind of sound, very
Okay.
much so. But it kept on reminding me of the Lion King, so that's wild.
The score for this film could have been created on a Sega Genesis.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I cannot call to mind any detail of either the Sega Lion King game or the score for the Lion King. Honestly.
Well, we had the score on CD, so we listened to
Wow.
it quite a lot as kids. So I do recognize more of the score than probably most people would. Between that and, you will not believe me, but completing and defeating the Lion King.
I
on
would
Sega.
believe you because as has come up in a previous episode of this very podcast, you have the deep lore when it comes to 90s video games. You played Descent.
It's true.
That's wild. Zimmer also wins Best Original Score for 2022's Dune. But that's not why we know Hans Zimmer. We know Hans Zimmer because of Christopher Nolan, because of those incredible scores for
Sure.
all 3 Batman movies, for Inception, the magnificent score for Interstellar, which might be my favorite
Yeah.
cinematic score of all time. Dunkirk, as well as sound producing for The Prestige. But, you know, Zimmer would also work on other things like Thelma and Louise and Gladiator
Yeah.
and Black Hawk Down and Hannibal and Matchstick Men. All of those, by the way, all for Ridley Scott. He does A League of Their
Wow.
Own for Penny Marshall. He does Muppet Treasure Island with Brian Henson.
I love Muppet Treasure Island.
He does that awesome Led Zeppelin-y sting for the Wonder Woman theme for Batman vs. Superman, which is then reused and kind of rearranged for the Wonder Woman films. Let's look just at his 2009, just a random average year for Hans Zimmer. In 2009, he composes music for The Boat That Rocked, which is a British comedy about pirate radio. I don't know if that even made it to the United States. But he also worked on Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, the second Michael Bay Transformers movie, Angels and Demons, the second Da Vinci Code movie, Sherlock Holmes, the Guy Ritchie, Robert Downey Jr. one, the video game Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and of course, Nancy Meyer's It's Complicated.
Wow.
That film does not need a Hans Zimmer score,
No,
firstly.
it doesn't.
And secondly,
That's funny.
one of these things is not like the
Yeah.
other. Zimmer will compose again for Levinson on the movie Toys, An Everlasting Peace, and The Survivor, and will compose for Cruise again in Days of Thunder, Mission Impossible 2, by far the worst of the Mission Impossible films, The Last Samurai, and Top Gun Maverick. So we'll have
Last
opportunities.
Samurai has a beautiful soundtrack too.
Yeah, to talk about Zimmer again in the
Okay.
future. And that is all the background on this film.
We did
And I
it.
do mean all of it. Let's get into our discussion. I was just complaining last week about those awful 80s title sequences and how I need to be done with them. So thank you, Rain Man, for giving me this incredibly tasteful credit sequence. It's so good. It's so elegant. It's so grown up. It doesn't feel insecurely 80s the way
It
that so
must
many of
be
them
because
have.
I didn't even notice it, which
It's
is what you
just
want a credit sequence to be.
Understated white
Yeah.
text. It just does a lovely serifed font,
Yep.
even. Just
There you
really
go.
strong. We are introduced to Charlie. Well, actually, we're introduced to a Lamborghini in a
Yes.
crane swinging across the sky of LA,
Interesting start.
which is great. I
Yeah.
think. Those 80s Lamborghinis are so ugly.
I completely agree. It's my first note. 80s cars, period. So ugly, period.
And so,
Yep.
so beautifully counterposed with the Buick that
Yeah.
we'll spend most of the film
Yeah,
in.
which is a gorgeous
It's
car. of
really
course.
nice. Yeah.
Mhm.
And does, I think, speak to a kind of, I don't know, there's an element of rejection of modernity throughout this film. We don't fly, we don't take the highways. It turns into like an
Mhm.
old-fashioned kind of Trans-America road movie. You
Yeah.
know? Even when we get to Vegas, we're kind of hitting that 60s.
Sure, like the
sensibility.
Sands and
Yeah.
Caesars. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it feels like a film that is hearkening back to something
Mhm.
older. And as we're dealing with two characters who are both kind of orbiting the emotional black hole of the death of their father and their reconnection with each other, I think there's a lot to be said there about a kind of regress and then progress, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I think too, though, they get that the Watchmen, which is like a very modern device, I suppose, for Ray to watch TV.
Yeah.
He carries
Yeah.
a little TV around. But even
Yes.
it feels like a little 50s TV.
It feels like a little
because
50s
you
TV.
know,
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
It's a great combination of like very modern technology that feels like product placement.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Oh, well,
I'm
of
sure they
course.
got money
Yes.
from Sony for
I'm
that
certain.
thing. But yeah, because of the size of the screen, because of the quality of the image,
Yeah.
and because we're echoing, who's on first, and we're echoing these
Right.
old traditional, even the idea of like game shows,
Mhm.
very throwback and 50s.
Yeah, that's fun.
So this is our introduction to Charlie, who is a hustler. He's importing these Lamborghinis in a semi-shady gray market kind of way, I suppose.
I had trouble following what was going on, except that obviously he was
Yeah.
lying to people, and
He has taken money to import these cars.
Okay.
And there seems to be some suspicion over where these cars came from. Like maybe he's not supposed to be importing them in this particular way. And then they're failing their
right,
emissions
passing
test. Which is
inspections and failing
so
emissions
late 80s.
tests.
I
Yes.
love that.
Mhm.
Here in LA, there used to be smog. Not
Yeah.
anymore, obviously. We're very strict about emissions. What is your first impression of Charlie Babbitt?
Oh, just a dick, which I think is true. Like,
Yeah.
it's really kind of ballsy to come out with this guy who's so unlikable, so clearly just the worst kind of person, such
Yeah.
a manipulator, someone who doesn't appear to have any kind of empathy or compassion, but just uses people as a means to an end. It's a really strong start, and it gives him so far to go. And I think they deliver on it. So I think it's a strong opening.
Yeah, I think this is the second film after The Color of Money in which we've seen Cruise really subordinate himself to a more established and more technically recognized actor. I think that putting himself under Newman is easy because Newman's a real movie star and he's,
Yeah.
Always been Tom Cruise's favorite. Subordinating himself to Hoffman, I think, is a real interesting act of humility almost. And the way that he is willing to take the hits in these scenes and
Yeah.
never try to exceed what Hoffman is so quietly doing. I cannot say enough good things about his performance in this film. I think
Good.
that if we are talking about Tom Cruise, the actor, rather
Yeah.
than Tom Cruise, the movie star, this I think is a real standout. I'm not sure we're going to do a lot better than his performance here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's some lovely moments, there really are, and some really nuanced moments too, which is not something I necessarily think of Tom Cruise for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we very quickly realize that he is out on a limb, that he is underwater with these cars. He's having these problems. He has his employee, Lenny, and his girlfriend, Susanna, who is just stunning.
Way too good for him. That's the one thing. Like, I love her. I'm glad that she's here, but also you're so too
Yes.
good for this man. And the fact that she comes back is like, oh, I'm so glad she's back. Why did you come back to this guy?
Thrilled that we cast Valeria Golino in
Oh,
this
yeah.
role. Slightly unsure, yes, as to why she is with him in this film at all. Why is she not?
Especially since we see
living a
them having
completely
sex,
different life?
and it looks pretty middling, you guys.
Yeah,
right?
this is not a sexy film.
No.
For sure. And it's interesting, again, to see Cruise playing this hustler in a much more committed and developed role than the version of this that we got just last week in Cocktail.
What do you mean?
This fast on his feet, fast talking, I'm keeping all the balls in the air.
Oh,
everything's,
and
you know,
yeah, trying to get rich quick and
Yeah,
game the
exactly,
system.
exactly.
Yeah, okay, of course.
he finally gives into the incessant nagging of his girlfriend Susanna to go away on some kind of vacation.
Yeah.
But on the road, he gets a phone call from Lenny telling him that his father has died. And we
This is nicely done.
turn right there in the road.
Yeah.
It's really strong and, again, cinematically so striking.
Yes, we love wind farms. Some people don't like them and just see them as a terrible blight on the landscape, but I just find them really magical and strange.
Yeah, even people who are politically aligned with wind farms
Yeah.
often don't like the aesthetics of a wind farm.
Right.
Yeah, you and I absolutely in agreement on this. Big fans of wind
Yep.
farms. We cut to the funeral, and it's interesting that we cut to the funeral because at this point in the film, we are tight. At this point in
Yeah.
the film, there isn't an ounce of fat on the thing. We're
Absolutely.
really moving. We're really focused. That is not going to be the case
No.
for the entire running time of this film. Susanna starts a really nice recurring beat here where she is chafing at being left in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go to Charlie's father's house and the 1949 Buick Roadmaster convertible.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, it's so good. It's such
Gorgeous
a beautiful car.
Yeah.
I love the story that we get here about Charlie stealing the car when he was 16.
Yes, and I love Susanna being on his dad's side. I think it's so smart and funny.
It's so great because in another version of this film, this would be a heartwarming moment. We would be
Yeah.
able to, we're being brought into Charlie's perspective. We're siding with him against the tyranny of his father, but we do not do that in this film.
No.
It is clear at every moment that no, he was a terrible kid.
Yeah. And he's like, he left me in prison for 2 days. Like, son, that is like a county jail at best. That is not prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were 2 of these Roadmaster convertibles used for the shoot. There's the regular one that we get in the wide shots, and then there's one with additional suspension so that it can carry the very heavy camera mounts that we use for when we're shooting interiors. After production was complete, Hoffman bought the unmodified one, Levinson bought the modified one, and then paid a lot of money to have it unmodified.
I love that.
Very cute.
Too good a car to let it just go.
Exactly, right? The will is then read, and after a savage letter from his father, Charlie learns that he's
savage but brilliant. That was
so good.
I think that's the best piece of screenwriting in the whole thing is the letter from his father.
It's really tremendous, and that performance is really quite good from the lawyer too.
Yeah.
I think, you know, we can command our core cast here. We can command Hoffman and Galino and Cruz. I think the rest of the cast of this film is kind of shaky.
Yeah, I would agree.
I don't think there's a lot of real strong acting. Indeed, Levinson himself shows up as the doctor later and gives a really mixed kind of performance. But it does help kind of cement the idea that Charlie and Ray are special, are connected in that sense. So Charlie learns that he's getting the car and the title to the rose bushes, which is a real screw you move.
Yes.
Everything else is being placed in a trust fund. Charlie goes to the bank to charm his way into information about that trust fund, which leads him and us pretty quickly to Walbrook, the local mental institution. This is where we learn that the director is the secret trustee, but the money isn't going to Walbrook because outside, Susanna is already sitting in the car with Raymond, Charlie's secret brother. What do you make of this character introduction for Ray?
Perfect. I think it's great. I love that he does the exact same thing that Charlie had done going into seeing the car and just gives all the specs by rote, as he said.
By rote.
Yeah. It's really beautiful. Yeah.
It is
a lot of fun.
Such a beautiful piece of echoing there. And we're really connecting these two. Despite the fact that they don't really look alike. And obviously Hoffman is so much older and Raymond is so much older than Charlie.
I think in profile there's a similarity, but that's about where it's lost. Yeah. And even in stature, there's a little bit of a similarity, but
neither is a particularly tall man.
Yeah.
No, that's true. I love what Hoffman is doing in this. I can't emphasize that enough, mostly because it caught me so much by surprise.
Right.
I was absolutely expecting
ready to hate it.
To just kind of grit my teeth and cringe my way through this film. It is so light.
Yeah.
It is absolutely intentional. You know, he's doing a lot, but everything that he's doing is so modulated to the need of the scene. It is a surprisingly selfless performance, which is not something that I associate with method actors. I usually see that as an excuse for the exercise of ego, and I think that that's a pretty defensible position, honestly. But this is, a very selfless performance. I'm aware that we're moving very quickly through the outline of this film, and that's just because not a lot happens. And that's going to become a bigger problem as we move forward, where we start revisiting the same conversational ticks again and again.
Yes.
Is there something to the repetition in this film? You know, obviously we see that repetition in Ray's dialogue.
Right.
Which forces a certain kind of repetition from whoever he's talking to as they have to enter into this kind of circular logic that Ray displays.
I think when people are talking with Ray, it works, and that's fine. And of course, Ray doing it himself works. But it's the moments when, for example, we were just talking about the will being read and the rose bushes, where the lines that Charlie Babbitt has sound like Raymond later. And maybe that's supposed to give them like a brotherly, a fraternal familiarity or something. But to me, it just reads as bad script writing, you know?
Well, and I wonder how much of a script we had.
The rose bushes, I got the rose bushes. Definitely the rose bushes. Because the definitely thing is such a Raymond thing.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, that one really jumped out at me too.
Right?
And does maybe feel like, you know, because so many of these scenes were plot holes in the original script, so we are coming up with this material on set, which is why some of those extended conversations kind of circle the point a couple times before we hit a resolution, because
which is a thing that happens. Like when you speak with another person a lot, you do start to pick up on their mannerisms and talk back to them, especially particularly empathetic people, as actors are, will start to echo back what is being given to them as a means of better communicating with the person. So I can definitely see where that happened. I can definitely see it. I can definitely see how that could happen.
I really do like Cruz in that scene. I do like it less as either a reflection of or an anticipation of Ray. I like Cruz's performance. I don't like what Charlie is doing, I guess I can put it that way.
Sure. Yeah, fair enough.
Back at Walbrook, we get our primer on what being an autistic savant means, as Dr. Bruner explains this to Charlie. Raymond needs routine. He doesn't understand money, but we see the light in Charlie's eyes, and that means a movie's going to happen, you guys.
Right? Doesn't understand money, you say.
Really? It's pretty tight motivation, honestly.
It is. Yeah.
And I like the idea that in the first instance, Charlie's desire is basically to kidnap his brother and force a more equitable restitution from the trust as he sees it. And then the film that we get does evolve organically. I think there's a real kind of late period screenwriter's handbook, like Save the Cat kind of desire to establish the entire scope of your film in the first 20 minutes. And we don't do that here. We don't get to the idea of counting cars in Vegas until after we have passed Vegas.
Yeah.
Which is
That is
genius.
wild. They turned back around. Yeah. I like it.
The modern version of this film would be Charlie conceiving of this plot to go and scam casinos right there in the place. And I love that it is more ramshackle. It's more Shaggy Dog than that.
More Shaggy Dog than Save the Cat. I like that.
This is when we cut to Raymond's room and we get the practical introduction to how his disorder manifests itself. What do you think of the baseball stuff and the use of, to echo the 1950s preoccupation that this film has displayed? What do you think of the role that baseball plays for Raymond? Is it just tokenistic of like the American obsession, or is it something more specific?
I think it makes a lot of sense for Raymond because of baseball cards and facts. Like someone who likes to acquire and remember facts and dates and names and places, baseball makes a lot of sense. Just the statistics alone.
Yeah,
like
it's
if you're a stats
statistically
guy.
driven. Yeah, it's the Moneyball of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it makes sense.
Sure. This is where we also learn about his discomfort with physical touch. And it's a really great scene. Susanna in particular, I think, is so empathetic, is so lovely. This is when we also have Vern, the nursing assistant, who
I
is
liked him
so
a lot.
great.
Yeah.
And demonstrates to us how one can meaningfully interact with Raymond. Raymond is not just a problem. He is a person.
Right.
He demands and requires a certain modality of interaction, which Charlie can see, can observe, which Susanna picks up immediately, and Charlie just chooses not to.
Just refuses.
It's to have that structure where the demonstration of this is how we do it, to see Susanna learning how to do it and to see Charlie refusing it, I think is very strong.
Completely agree. Yeah, it's well done. And deeply uncomfortable. You really are just disliking Charlie at this moment.
Oh, absolutely.
It's another reason why I think it's so smart to have Susanna there, calling him out.
Yeah, I think that's particularly valuable because this is Tom Cruise we're talking about. Do you think that his performance is sufficient to communicate to the audience how unlikable Charlie is, or how bad Charlie is?
Definitely.
Okay, so it's a kind of belt and braces approach here. That the performance is doing it, but we also have the structure surrounding him emphasizing that we know that you like this guy and other things. We know that you just saw him in Cocktail, and wow, wasn't he dreamy? But here, he's maybe not a good guy.
Yes.
Charlie sends Susanna off with the car and then promises Raymond a LA Dodgers baseball game. And then we get the iconic shot of the two of them, the iconic shots, I should say, of the two of them walking down the drive.
Which are beautiful shots.
Gorgeous. The film really taking its time to communicate this sense of space and distance.
Yep.
It's absolutely mesmerizing as it unfolds. I really think the cinematography handles space so beautifully. We get some very unconventional framing where we're getting just acres of sky or acres of countryside, just really showing how we're transiting. We do wide shots from much wider back than you normally would, where the car is just isolated on these country roads.
We also have these occasional fisheye lenses. Have you noticed those? Those ones don't work for me.
Those ones don't. That's kind of dated.
Yes.
But I think that comes from the same cinematic desire to emphasize space and isolation.
I think so too.
Except not isolation, because the men are together, the brothers are together,
Yeah. It's beautifully done. It's a gorgeous movie, and it doesn't have to be, because the subject matter is so serious and because the story itself is so compelling. To make it also lovely, I think, is a good choice.
We're really doubling down on Charlie as a terrible, monstrous human being through this part, because this is when
this really is just
book
straight
into the
kidnapping.
hotel.
Yeah.
Well, but even when we get into the hotel and he's trying to arrange everything, he's completely separated from Susanna. It's completely incidental, but it is demonstrative of character when he says that he's ordering a pizza and asks her if she wants pepperoni, and she says no, and he orders it anyway.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't care. He's kind of obeying the social formality of asking,
Right.
but not even listening to the response.
No. While she's moving the bed to the window for Raymond,
Yeah.
like doing the physical and emotional labor for him.
Yes, and being empathically connected
Absolutely.
to Raymond in a way that Charlie is disconnected from everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But at least that means that he has bad sex.
Right? This is the thing I was saying earlier too. Yeah, it's an odd sequence anyway, and I don't think that we need it. And it's I can definitely understand being in the throes of passion and not recognizing that somebody has wandered through an open door. But this was not throes of passion. This is like
Second film in a row where we are just underneath acres and acres of sheets.
yeah. I don't mind all the acres of sheets covering Valeria Galino. We get her in the bathtub later. She stands up out of the bathtub, and you're fully expecting to get fully nude woman.
Move,
And
the way that the camera moves when she gets out of the bathtub,
so smart and lovely.
masterful.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous.
And I'm so grateful for it. It's the kind of thing we were talking about with Color of Money when we have Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio naked in the bathroom, and she doesn't need to be. We don't have to have the actor do that. We don't have to see her body in that way to understand that somebody else is and does.
That's the other thing about the scene in the bathroom when Susanna gets out of the bathtub is that we do not sacrifice an ounce of intimacy
Right.
in that move,
Right.
despite never showing her naked body.
Yes.
It's genius. It's
I completely
absolutely
agree.
a scene that I'm going to reference in the future as the proof that you do not need to necessarily depict nudity in order to communicate intimacy.
I completely agree.
What do you think of Raymond being confronted with adult sexuality? We don't really play very hard on Raymond being infantilized or being anything other than an adult. We are generally quite respectful of the fact that he's a grown man.
Right.
What do you think of this interaction? It's obviously, uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think in this sequence it doesn't work at all, and I don't think we need it, especially because we do it so much better later in Vegas.
Sure.
In Vegas, when he meets with Iris, and we see how little he knows and how little facility he has with romance or sex.
Yeah.
And then Susanna kisses him in the elevator. That sequence does so much more than this one does. I don't think you need it.
I agree, absolutely, but I don't think that the intents are the same. I don't think that this is supposed to be about opening Raymond up to a world of sexual desire as much as it is about making him seem like a threat, making him seem the way that we stage it and play it. I think that we are waiting for him to react badly, waiting for him to interrupt the proceedings, not just with, a polite, excuse me, could you not have sex very loudly while I'm in the next room,
Right.
but with a real, transgressive kind of interruption, a socially transgressive kind of interruption. I think that we are supposed to be uncomfortable by Raymond's intrusion into this moment, but not uncomfortable for Raymond, uncomfortable for Charlie and Susanna.
Oh, I did not feel that.
It's not something that we're going to do later in the film,
Yeah.
but it feels like maybe we're supposed to be on edge a little bit to me.
Especially, again, since the door was open. Like, to me, again, it just shows
Demonstrating how
much
little Charlie cares.
he just doesn't care. Yeah.
The next morning, we go to a diner, the first of, 17 scenes that we get in a diner.
Love a diner.
It made me want pancakes so
I'm
bad,
sure
you
it did.
guys.
Yep. Thin, crispy pancakes.
Pancakes and diner coffee. You want to go out after this recording?
I kind of do. Butter that's in you got to peel back the foil to get to it.
Sure.
I just want it.
This is the first time that Raymond demonstrates his savant abilities out on the road. This is the memorization of the waitress's phone number, which is really cute.
It's cute.
Very well ordered and a tight bit of storytelling there. We are, unfortunately, going to hit this beat 6 or 8 times before it really sticks, but it's good and enjoyable. It's basically enjoyable every time we do it.
Yeah.
But we maybe don't need to do it so much. This is also, we've talked in this podcast before about smoking on screen. Cruise does smoke in this film, but he is so often holding a cigarette or has a cigarette in an ashtray throughout this entire diner scene, which is a long sequence. He has the cigarette in the ashtray in front of him. It is burning. It is coiling smoke into the shot. He does not touch it the whole time that we're there. This is the first time that I'm noticing a change in our attitudes towards smoking.
Yeah.
Which 88 makes sense.
That sounds about right. And he's the, bad guy. So bad
Absolutely.
guy smoking will go on for a long time.
Charlie calls Dr. Brunner, but he is unwilling to cut a deal. Raymond, meanwhile, demonstrates his ability to accurately count with great speed. This is the toothpick scene that's very famous.
With Bonnie Hunt.
With Bonnie Hunt.
Yeah.
The brilliant Bonnie Hunt just showing up for a minute.
Love it.
At the airport, Raymond refuses to board the plane, citing airline crash statistics. This is a 4-minute scene that was cut from the film by a number of different airlines when they wanted to show the film in flight, which is kind of understandable. Levinson, Bass, and the then president of the WGA all formally protested the cut. And let me tell you, the airlines did not care and continued to show the cut version. The only airline that did not edit this film when they showed it in flight, Qantas, of course.
Of course. Qantas, naturally.
Qantas has not lost a jet. They have not ever suffered a crash, not since 1951 when they really moved into commercial air flight. They are the only airline in the world without a crash on their records.
That's amazing.
Isn't that crazy?
Wow, it is, yeah. It's also so strange, though, because air travel is so much safer than being on the road. And then he talks about highway traffic later.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that Raymond will not get into a plane, but will get into a car.
Yeah, I would be fascinated to know if this was in the original draft of the script or in one of the full drafts of the script that was extant before Levinson came onto the project, or if this was another plug intended to fit a hole. Well, why don't they just fly?
Yeah.
Damn, that's a good question. Because
like
then
it,
our
though.
movie is 25
Right.
minutes.
I like it, though, because it does add more like humanity and personality to Raymond, because it's not just all about facts. There's a feeling and an emotion about it,
Absolutely,
too.
yeah.
There's
That's a really
just
good point.
fear, you know?
I also love the performances in this entire sequence. I think that Cruise manages to walk a great line between, yes, being just a raging asshole, but also being a smart hustler, being a smart negotiator, kind of, finding a path, finding a tactic, finding a strategy. That it's good stuff. So this is our motivation for the entire second act of the film is now going to be a road trip instead of a plane flight, I guess, which is fantastic.
Much
what a
better.
strong choice. I love driving. I love
Yeah.
road trips. I don't care about flying. I've never been like scared in the air, but yeah, not a choice I would ever willingly
Not
make.
enchanted either. Sure.
Yeah. I would take
am
a
quite enchanted by flying. I like it.
24-hour road trip rather than flying.
Wow. Yeah, I can't agree with you there, although I would go with you. But yeah, if I'm just going on my own, especially, I want to fly. Let's get there.
Yeah. Shortly thereafter, we have our second beat in this, organizational maneuver where we have the crash on the highway. A really distressing scene of Raymond walking in front of the car. I think just so hard, so emotionally taxing on the audience, but obviously intentionally so.
Yeah.
This worked for you?
Yeah, I like ramping up the emotions, I suppose, and forcing Charlie to take care of his brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We then have to wait out the rain in a hotel, and this is where the cinematography just goes to town. This is so lush and beautiful, so artistically arranged. It's slow, certainly. In terms of our plot, we do lose propulsion.
We do.
That itself is part of the plot. We can see Charlie's rising frustration there, Instead of taking 3 hours to get to LA, it's going to take me 3 days. It is not, by the way, a 3-hour flight from Cincinnati to LA. Not even now. It's like almost double that. But, we can forgive him. Maybe they had faster planes in this imaginary 1988.
There was an excellent tailwind.
Maybe he had a jet from Top Gun that he had just kept. We don't know that this isn't Pete Mitchell. We don't know for sure. I do think it's a fair criticism of the film from this point on that it becomes somewhat episodic. It becomes a string of events, and we move from one to the next simply by observing a cut. We're done with this scene now, so it is going to stop, and then we will pick up at our next. We do Raymond crossing the street.
Sure, the crosswalk.
In Guthrie, yes, with the don't walk sign, which is echoed later, which is a really nice bit of screenwriting, but it is a self-contained moment unto itself. We then get the doctor's office, as I mentioned earlier. This is Levinson himself stepping into his own film, which is not perhaps the strongest choice. I don't think that this completely works. Does it work for you? Is it warm? I think they're aiming for warm.
With the doctor?
Yeah.
I don't think I get warm. No. I'm also really sensitive to bad Oklahoma accents, which this guy has. So I don't love that either.
See our previous episode on The Outsiders.
Exactly. But it's okay. Yeah. I don't mind it, I suppose. It's just that this whole part of the movie just feels very choppy. I'm not certain why we do this sequence now and why we don't learn this back at Walbrook with Vern.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And I liked Vern so much more.
It does remind me you've never seen Wayne's World 2, have you? I know this sounds like I'm making a crazy jump, but I'm making a very literal jump. There is a scene in Wayne's World 2 where Wayne is trying to get to a wedding to stop his girlfriend from marrying the wrong guy.
Sure.
And he pulls up at a gas station, and the gas station attendant is supposed to just like tell him where the church is. And he does. And Wayne turns to the camera and says, look, I know this is just a bit part, but can't we get a better actor than this guy? And then Charlton Heston comes on set and they shoot this gorgeous monologue.
Gordon Street. Oh, yes. Gordon Street. I once knew a girl who lived on Gordon Street a long time ago, when I was a young man. Not a day passes I don't think of her. And the promise I made, which I will always keep. That one perfect day on Gordon Street. That's 5 blocks up, 2 over. Thank you.
And the punchline is cutting back to Wayne, who just has tears streaming down his face. It's really well done.
That's
and it
funny.
just makes me wish, can't we get a better actor than the director of this film?
Yes,
just for this. We should mention the guy also who is sitting in the waiting room talking to Ray about the Pony Express. That is not an actor. That is just a guy who was already in that waiting room when they turned up to shoot. And they're like, oh yeah, his name is Byron P. Kavner, a local Guthrie resident who was just there the day that they showed up to shoot. And they were so taken with him, they just invited him to stay on set and talk to Dustin Hoffman.
I like it.
So none of that stuff about the Pony Express is scripted. It's all just off the dome.
Amazing. I've been in that building, actually.
You have?
Yeah. When I went up to Guthrie recently to tour a distillery at Wonderfolk, that building is the same building. I believe it was either I took in a lot of information that day, and as you might imagine,
And
drank a lot of
liquor.
booze.
Yeah.
However, it was either the upstairs of the building I was in or across the street from the building that I was in. But I believe it was the upstairs was
Very cool.
that room where they shot that sequence.
If only you'd watched this film a few weeks earlier, you would have been able to, I don't know
Take
what.
a selfie or something. I don't know.
Do your best Tom Cruise impression while you're up there. We get this sequence, the next event, the next pearl in our String of Pearls plot is at the farmhouse because Ray wants to watch his show. So they go to this farmhouse and kind of try to con their way in and then just tell the truth and are welcomed into the bosom of this family. I don't know that this accomplishes anything, but again, we're getting these gorgeous wide shots. We're getting a lot of character. We're getting some great performances. Does it work for you? Does it do anything?
It does something, but I think the something that it does I don't like. It makes me uncomfortable. It feels exploitative in a way that I can't quite put my finger on, of like,
let's gawk at the poor people.
Poor American families. Yeah.
No, I feel
I don't
that
like
too.
it.
Yeah, it's a little unfair.
Yeah, she seems so harried.
Yeah.
I just get the sense that her husband's a real piece of work.
Which is the sense that you're kind of led to, not necessarily by this scene in isolation, but we know this farmhouse, we know this family, we've seen people like this in movies before, and that's the stereotype, that's the cliche. And invoking that cliche for like warmth and wholesome Americana, while also echoing those moments of this is a bad situation, this woman is not living her best life for sure.
Right.
Yeah, it's a little careless. It's one of the few times I think that the film really makes a tonal misstep.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I would agree.
Night falls and they stop at another motel.
I love the motels.
Of course.
I just like a kind of dingy roadside motel.
Sure.
I want it to be clean, but I just kind of like it.
This is the point at which Charlie's credit card is declined. We can feel the rising pressure, very slowly building pressure in the back of his mind. This is also the scene where we try to really do some close textual reading on who's on first. That it's not a riddle, that it is not a puzzle to be solved. It is just a joke.
It's just a joke.
Everything about this, obviously I love close reading. Obviously I love like textual interpretation. Obviously I love like that kind of fine semantic distinction between what is a riddle and what is a joke and how are you supposed to approach a text. And I know that I'm overthinking this even as I'm explaining it now. I love this stuff. It doesn't completely land for me. When we get to the end of the film and we are using the told a joke kind of mechanic between these two characters, it feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere, doesn't it?
Certainly trying to explain who's on first and why it's a joke doesn't actually work. I do like the idea that Charlie is trying to teach Raymond about humor or understand his sense of humor or to make him laugh.
Yeah.
And later that works for me. When he does make him laugh and it's not a joke, it's just an observation.
Yeah.
Is cute. I like it. It's just situational comedy,
Exactly.
Yeah. And that works. And I like the pride that Charlie seems to have in having made his brother laugh. But yeah, here it's just repetitive. I don't need Who's on First anymore. We've done it a lot. you know?
Who's on First specifically, I think, has just been drained of its comic potential now. It's just been invoked and referenced so many times that there's just not a lot of juice there.
Yeah. Which is too bad because it was, of course, a very brilliant skit.
Of course.
Yeah.
But these things don't live forever. They don't.
No.
They can't generate comedy forever. There's a certain kind of, familiarity breeds exhaustion.
Yes.
I think when it comes to comedy. It's wild that in the short-lived Aaron Sorkin comedy Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, Who's on First is invoked by one of the professional comedians on that show as the finest example of comedy. That is what he shows to his parents in order that they might understand what sketch comedy is, which is a bewildering choice. That is a show that does not understand comedy. Much more importantly, though, this is the sequence where Charlie begins to connect Raymond with Rain Man, this imaginary friend that he's referenced earlier in the film.
All of that is gorgeous. Luminous. Yeah. The hot water coming into the tub is shot so well. It's so simple.
Yeah.
But the tub being kind of grungy, the steam rising up like it does, and the real terror that we get from Raymond. And then to find that he was not the one that was hurt, but that he hurt someone. And that's why it's so traumatic to him is really, really beautiful.
All of that.
Yeah. And Charlie's saying,
observed.
it's okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm not burned. Really, really beautiful.
So human.
Mm-hmm. It makes me frustrated that we just spent 20 to 40 minutes rehashing the same things over and over again. This is part of why I wish that the movie held together more, because I think you're right. I think I would revisit it much more and watch it. But there's just so much that doesn't hold together, or things that just feel time wasty, like places where I would get up and do laundry and then come back,
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching it this time, but I do feel that the middle of this film will be frustrating if I return to it with any kind of increased frequency or regularity. I think I'll maybe take another 10 years before I watch Rain Man again. And then I'll love it again because I will have forgotten all of the stitching in the middle of the film,
Mm-hmm.
This is when we start to alter Charlie's character just a little, and we do it so slowly and we do it so incrementally in a way that itself is a little frustrating, but is also kind of indicative of real character growth that people don't have in real life moments of lightning bolt revelation. They change more slowly than that. We begin this by having Charlie call Susanna that night. Then the next day, we learn that the Lamborghinis have been repossessed and that Charlie is now $80,000 in the hole.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I love that there's no deception in the movement of the plot. There's no sleight of hand here. He's not going to make it to LA at the last possible moment and save the day. He blew his chance.
He's lost it. Mm-hmm.
We're done now. But the lights of Las Vegas are on the horizon. And we're going to drive right through Vegas.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of this, do you think? What is the purpose of driving down the strip, doing the whole welcome to Vegas baby kind of razzmatazz?
Yeah.
Then leaving the city, going to a diner on the other side, on the western side of Vegas, and then having the moment of realization, wait, didn't I just see a casino somewhere? Where was that?
I don't know. It's weird.
It is, isn't it?
It's kind of fun. I like the turning around and going back.
Structurally, from a script perspective, that is a funny joke.
Yeah.
Right? You can imagine that being written in the script. They drive through Vegas, wind up at a diner, come back. That works. That is a funny joke for screenwriters. But when it takes 10 minutes on screen,
yeah.
I don't know. I'm at a loss.
More fat to trim, I think. Yes.
Yeah. We finally have Charlie understand Ray's savant abilities first through his memorization of the numbers on the jukebox in the diner.
Yep.
And then the somewhat iconic scene, I think, of him playing cards on the trunk of the car.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, we're in Vegas, and all of a sudden the film has pace, and all of a sudden there's all of this energy and spark.
And we're in matching suits. Where did we get those?
He goes to pawn his watch.
That's right. They pawned the watch. I remember him pawning the watch, but it didn't occur to me that they would buy suits with it. I guess I just thought it would go straight to money to gamble.
No,
but
that's
okay.
where we get our snake.
That's nice.
And
Yeah.
these snazzy
Yeah.
suits, which are very terrible suits.
Oh, they're so cute though that they
Oh.
match. I mean, the 80s is a tough time for fashion. We've talked about this, but
Top
yeah.
buttons, you guys. I can't get behind it now. I couldn't get behind it in 88. I'm
It's true.
not
It's
a
tough.
fan of top
Yeah.
buttons being done.
No.
Unless you're wearing a tie, of course. That's absolutely
Of course.
fine.
Mhm.
Top button, no tie?
Yeah.
Doesn't work for me.
Always makes me think of, I don't know, collared priest or something.
Right, yeah.
Mhm. Something monastic about it.
There's actually the whole makeover sequence, too, where we get our haircuts and, they look sharp. They look
do
good.
look sharp.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Then they get to work on the casino floor, but nobody can count a 6-deck shoe.
Uh-huh.
This is just great.
It is.
It's a beautiful sequence. The way that they're attracting all of this attention, the way that everyone is gathered around them in support of this, nefarious pursuit, because it's a casino. So even if they were playing completely straight, it would still be a semi-nefarious pursuit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And because, the house always wins, especially at blackjack. So to see somebody taking the house is exciting.
Exactly
It's
right.
fun.
Yeah. Bad odds at blackjack. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is also Cruise at his most, conventionally cruisy, I suppose.
Right.
Like this is him at his
Sure.
twinkliest.
Twinkle charm. Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Mm-hmm.
So, armed with Raymond's autistic savant superpowers, they managed to clear $86,000.
In a
the
really
casino.
short space of time, it feels
Yeah.
like. A few hours even, it's like an evening.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
like
good cards.
the subtlety as well of everyone on the casino floor clearly being clued into the fact that they're doing something. They don't know what it is.
Right.
They can't prove that they're cheating, but something is happening. And we get that like rising tension surrounding them as they're making more and more money, raking in more and more chips. It's a
Yeah.
really nice sequence. And from there, it's a hard transition to an eerily quiet bar. And all at once, the energy just kind of dissipates.
Mm.
This is where we first meet Iris, the sex worker,
Yes,
who gives a really nice performance.
I think so too. Yeah, I like her. Yeah.
What do you think of the film's decision to pair Ray with Iris?
What do you mean?
Do you think it is thoughtful and well-intentioned to pivot into exploring Ray's relationship with women, Ray's sexuality?
I mean, yes, ultimately.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like Iris. I like how gentle she is, but also forthright. I like where this takes us. I like that they make a date together, honestly.
Mhm.
She clearly can see, I mean, anybody can who's talking to Raymond can see that there's something different about his mental facilities, I suppose. And she does, I don't get from her in the little bit that we get that she's, trying to hustle this guy, but
No.
that he's a nice guy and
Yeah.
that everybody needs human touch from time to time.
Yeah, I don't know how concerned she is with his niceness as much as he is clearly a potential client
Sure. Yeah.
and would probably be a fairly easy time for her.
Yes. Yeah. I would imagine so.
I love that the film doesn't make her, the awful, evil, predatory sex
Nope.
worker. There's no kind of concept of anyone really predating upon Ray except Charlie.
for Charlie.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
we've cracked the icy surface of his character too now. This is when we go up into the pretty fantastic, albeit in a late 1980s kind of way, the penthouse suite
Yes.
where they're going to spend much of the rest of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And he apologizes. He thanks
He
Ray,
does.
which is such
Yeah.
a lovely scene.
Yeah, he's trying to really emotionally connect with Raymond. And I think it's kind of sweet to find him be frustrated by that when he asks for a hug and it freaks out Raymond. And he is suddenly a little brother again. And it's just like, I just wanted a hug. I just wanted to hug you.
Yeah. There is perhaps a possible interpretation of Charlie's character in this part of the film where it's real easy to be generous when you're winning. It's real easy to be kind to
Yeah.
others
Oh,
when you've already
sure.
got everything that you want.
Yeah.
And a pathway to even more, because
Mhm.
presumably they are not going to rest. They're not going to stop winning in casinos just
imagine
because
not.
they've dug him out of his debt. But
Yeah.
it is very sweet. I mean, again, literally the moment we leave the casino floor, the film slows down again. The scene
Yes.
with Iris is deliberately very slow, but a lot of these scenes are going to feel perhaps a little slow, perhaps a little ponderous, and perhaps as though they take too much time
Mm-hmm.
as we move toward the end of the film. For example, Charlie is about to teach Ray how to dance, which
Mhm.
is a really lovely scene, but this is a metaphor that you have implanted in my brain. This idea that you put things up on a whiteboard just to kind of corral all of your ideas.
Oh, yeah.
And you ought not to use that whiteboard as a script.
Mm-hmm.
But there are aspects of that in this film.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense when you say that somebody went through and cut out a bunch, or people went in and added a bunch to kind of like shore it up, and then somebody else came in and took out a bunch.
Yeah.
Because there are moments where it feels slow, but not with purpose. And there are moments when like big events happen, but like we don't need to go to Vegas. I'm glad that we do. I enjoy that part of the movie quite a lot, but it does kind of stand out as this strange. Now we're doing a casino heist in a high roller suite. It feels like a different movie.
Yeah, though Vegas, I think, is maybe more integrated into what few plot mechanics we actually have in the course of the story, right? We have to get some money. We have to motivate everything that's happening, and then we have to resolve that motivation. So it works from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
the tone just is so different now all of a sudden.
If you made it to the end of this film and Iris wasn't in it, and we didn't have the dancing, and we didn't have the kissing in the elevator, you wouldn't feel as though anything was missing per se. I don't think you would necessarily feel like, oh, it's such a shame we didn't really get to wrestle with Raymond integrating himself into like a romantic social context. I think the film as a whole, even though most of these constituent parts are very good, the film as a whole suffers from maybe just having too many of them.
Yeah, I think that's right. You end up feeling a little bit like you're flipping through the scrapbook of this road trip that these guys took.
Yes.
There's just not a whole lot of connecting tissue.
Yeah. Do you wish that we'd kept Susanna with us for the entire road trip?
I mean, we can't. I get that we can't, and I understand the reasons why, and I think it's good that we don't, because it would be way too easy to rely on her to be the emotional connection between these two men and to do all of the emotional labor for both of them. Removing her means that Charlie has to grow up a little bit and has to change an arc in a way that I don't think that he'd be able to do if she was right there by his side.
That's a great observation. I think you're absolutely right. From there, we have Susanna, in fact, show up again. We get the romantic sequence with Raymond. What do you think of the kiss? The kiss is controversial. I didn't know that the kiss was controversial until I was researching this. But the kiss is a very controversial moment.
I think especially in the hands of Valeria Golina, who is so generous and kind in this scene, as well as being so beautiful and sexy, but not, again, in any way predatory, not seductive either, but just generous is the word that comes to mind.
Beautiful and sexy, but not sexualized.
Yeah. I think
at
that's
least
right.
not in an
Sensuous,
objective.
I would say. Yeah. I love when she
Which
says,
is really what the kiss is about, right? It's
Right.
about sensuality and experience more than it's about
Absolutely.
having sex. Yeah.
Yeah, I love what she says about like you're tasting something very sweet and very soft.
Yes.
Like just
Very
so
good.
good. Shut up. Yeah, it's excellent.
The next day, Raymond drives the car down the drive, which is a nice moment. We get that.
Love the drive in front
reiteration
of the
that.
Bellagio fountains. Gorgeous. Yeah.
Back in LA, we drop off Susanna because really that's enough girls in this film. Thank you so
Right.
much.
Yeah.
And Charlie shows Raymond around his apartment. We get the playing of the Abbott and Costello tape, and we understand that Raymond is now maybe seeing this more as a joke rather than something that is to be solved, which is, as we discussed, like in its way, a very nice evolution of his character. Charlie meets with Dr. Brunner, who tries to negotiate, offering Charlie $250,000 just to never see Ray again. And of course, this was where the film was going to end up. Of course, we were eventually going to do this. How do you feel? Obviously, it's not a surprise, and nor is the resolution.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the emotional aspects of these scenes and of these characters at this point?
I mean, I like that Brunner came all that way. It shows not only, I think, professionalism and loyalty to his patient, but a real care for Raymond. $250,000 feels like a real lowball to me, though. I gotta say, it's like $3 million, right?
It is.
Yeah. 250 feels low, so that's interesting. And
do you think it would have had additional emotional power if Brunner had just offered him the half that he wanted from the beginning?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, or at least close to it. Like even $750 is like significant cash, and not that 250 isn't, but just out of $3 million, it feels lowballing. I don't know.
No, I hear that.
Yeah, at this point, the movie moves quickly again, I feel.
Quickly, but somewhat erratically.
Yes.
Yeah. We have Charlie asserting that he has resolved the anger that he feels toward his father.
Right.
And expressing gratitude for the realization that he has a brother in the first place. But from there, we start zagging in order to set up everything we need for the final emotional turn of the film. We have the moment, the one part of the production design that does not work for me at all is Raymond putting what is apparently a smoke bomb inside his toaster oven.
Yeah.
The
it's
amount
weird.
of smoke is outlandish.
Yes.
I like the sequence well
The
enough.
sequence is good and very effective, I think.
And obviously
Yeah.
Charlie coming to the rescue and beating the smoke alarm to death.
Yes,
Works
which is
quite
the
nicely.
only thing that you can do with flipping smoke alarms when they're going off, it seems like, yes. Mm-hmm.
But the decision there to demonstrate that perhaps Raymond ought not to be living by himself,
Mm-hmm.
coupled with the much more internal emotional beat that we get during the meeting with the psychiatrist, where he is just incapable of expressing a preference. He's incapable
Yes.
of taking charge of this kind of demand for autobiographical determinism, right? Like
Right.
he's called upon to decide what he wants his life to be, and he can't.
Right.
That's so much more damning, and we don't have to motivate that through this physical endangerment aspect, it seems to me.
No, I would agree with you, except that it did seem to be really important to Charlie to know that he could not take care of his brother and to just realize how much more challenging it would be than he thought. Like, just because they're cracking jokes now and enjoying being together is not the same as being an alert parent figure for the
Sure.
rest of your life.
The easy is easier,
Yes.
but the hard will remain as hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a nice way of putting that. Yeah.
I'm just remembering we're well past this spot now. Is it perhaps when they're leaving the bar when Charlie says to Raymond, the don't walk sign is on? He kind of echoes this experience from earlier in the film to tell him to stay put.
Right. Yes.
Such a lovely moment of characterization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is nice. Yes. And that they start to have like a little language together.
And then we have this touching moment of parting, but in a much grander sense, real reconciliation, right?
Yeah.
We have this moment when they are together. We have, as you said earlier, this recognition that they're telling jokes to each other now from Raymond, which is so adorable, right? Strong and really speaks to the intimacy of this relationship.
And the wonderful forehead touch, which is perfect. It's perfectly done. You don't need a hug. You don't need much.
It would feel so fake
It would.
to have a full hug at that point,
Yeah.
to do something more expressive and traditional.
Right.
No, you're absolutely right. It is note perfect. And for him to call Charlie his main man,
Yeah.
echoing the conversations with Ron, like, you are now trusted. You have now proven yourself to be a safe space for me emotionally. I mean, that's what it all comes down to, right? In the end, it's really terrific.
It's
and
beautiful.
Even the last scene as he's getting on the train,
Yeah.
we never compromise it. We never compromise it. We never break Ray
Right.
to
Ray is
deliver
always Ray.
a bigger emotional catharsis for the audience.
Or for Charlie, who doesn't deserve it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
His integrity throughout is just spectacular. And I could say the same for Cruz too. I think his integrity as Charlie, though he arcs much more than Raymond does,
Yes.
he's still the same guy. He's
Yeah.
still like kind of an asshole at the end of the film.
Yeah.
But now he understands more, at least, about what is important.
Yeah. I think it's just a lovely film in the end. I do think it's a little bit bloated in places. There's fat to trim, as we've said before, but ultimately it's a gorgeous film. I mean, I think it has a really good heart, and I like that it starts somewhere that's so off-putting. I like that Charlie is such a dick, as I said before in the beginning, and then turns into a real person and a real brother
Yeah.
here at the end. It's
And
nice.
it really doesn't put a foot wrong in terms of that emotional arc. It's a little jagged. It's a little seesaw. We progress and then regress
Yes.
a little bit. But that's, more a function of the improvisational nature of the middle act of the film
Yeah.
rather than a product of any kind of flaw in Cruz's performance or, the concept of the film as a whole.
Right.
A really good-hearted movie.
I think so too.
Yeah. Where do we put it on the list? I think there are only two possible spots.
It's going up there.
It's either number 1 on the list right above Top Gun
Mm-hmm.
or number 2 on the list right below Top Gun. And here's the argument as I
Yeah.
see it.
Uh-huh.
This film is good-hearted. It is profound. It is really beautifully studied. It is a character piece. It demands
Yeah.
so much more of Cruise than any of the films we've watched thus far.
Certainly
And
much more critically acclaimed as well.
absolutely true. And, at least as commercially successful, and if not as cinematically influential, at least as culturally influential.
Yes, I think that is true.
But Top Gun is a machine.
Yeah, well, and Top Gun is fun, and I don't know that Rain Man is fun.
There are certainly moments.
Not that being fun makes you a better movie, but it might push you higher on my personal list. Like,
No, I think that's a fair aspect. Sure.
Yeah. I think at basically any point, someone was like, "Hey, you want to watch Top Gun?" I'd be like, "Yeah, put it on." Hey, you want to watch Rain Man? We're like, "Ooh,
I'm going to need 3 hours in a quiet room. I'm going to
Yeah,
need a journal and a
yeah.
pen. Yeah. No, I do hear that. And I'm interested in how freely you would recommend Rain Man to someone who hadn't seen it or hadn't seen perhaps any Cruise movie. Would you feel comfortable recommending it now in 2023?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, any intelligent and good-hearted person is also going to see the date and see that it's 1988, and there's no way to argue that it's not a progressive film for its time. And it's even now, the people who are upholding the highest standard still seem to be doing a pretty damn good job. I mean, if you want to just put aside terminology, that's really the only place where I think it falters.
Well, it sounds like we're feeling very positive.
I think so.
Is it going top of the
and
list?
I'm so glad, because I know, again, that you were dreading it. So
I really
good.
was.
Yeah.
I really was. And I've spent a lot of time since watching the film kind of considering whether or not this was just like a nice surprise or if it really is as good as I feel that it is. And yeah, I would have no trouble recommending Rain Man if you are interested in Cruise as an actor.
Sure.
I think Rain Man is an absolute success. If you're interested in Cruise as a movie star, much less so.
Yeah.
And I don't think, whether it goes above or below Top Gun, I don't think there's a lot of clear water between the two.
No.
If we're factoring in influence, if we're factoring in iconicity, if we're factoring in, the Cruise movie star persona of it all.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to echo this performance very often in the rest of Cruise's career.
No, I don't think so.
But I will leave it to you. First, second, what's your feeling?
I again have to put it on second. Yeah. I like it very much, but I just think Top Gun is such a blast, and it's such a movie. I don't know how to put it. You know what I mean? It's like,
wow, interesting.
It's a blockbuster in a way.
Movie film distinction coming into play here. Yeah.
Which I just always like.
I feel very comfortable with that. But again, to take nothing away from the quality of Rain Man as a film, like a really wonderful piece of work.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing is that Top Gun is just tight as a drum. Like the storytelling, it never drags. I know that you feel it does maybe a little bit, but I think that that's the point where we're sitting in grief as opposed to...
No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, wallowing the storytelling.
It slows down, but it slows down very deliberately. And even then, it is like maybe 4 minutes.
Yeah.
It is so brief.
Yeah, exactly.
It is just enough time. We'll do a beat with Iceman and we'll do a beat with Meg Ryan and then we'll wrap it all up and get back on the road. Yeah, I mean, it really is mechanical in a way that Rain Man is in many ways the opposite, right?
Yeah.
It is a much more studied and thoughtful and improvisational performance.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it, number 2 on the list, and that is going to do it for this week's episode of The Last Star in Hollywood. If you like what we do here, then you can head on over to our Patreon page. It's super familiar. You know what it looks like, or do you?
That's right.
Because we have a new Patreon page with a new URL. Actually, it's the same old Patreon page. It just has a new address. Patreon.com/nextword. Next Word, you ask? What on earth is that? Well, that is our new podcast network. We need a podcast network because we have a whole new show. Elizabeth, do you want to tell people about Stars and Swords?
Sure. So Stars and Swords is Alistair's new show where he is going through genre fiction, footnoting genre fiction, as a matter of fact, going through some old favorites and some hopefully new favorites.
Absolutely, yeah.
And starting with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the C.S. Lewis classic, which is perfect for this time of year, I think.
And so brief.
And
I get
so
to cover
brief,
the entire book in
nice.
3 weeks. It's going to be great, yes.
That show will function almost like a podcast book club. So reading a certain chunk of chapters
That's the plan.
each week and then going through to do a nice close reading, a lecture format. And yeah, everybody will get to join in, do Q&As in the Discord.
That is, the part of it that I'm looking forward to most. I
I'm
think it's probably going to
sure.
have a robust discussion attached to it. So,
That's
of course.
wonderful.
So you can find more, including the first real episode, over at starsandswords.com. And if you like that show too, then yes, supporting us at patreon.com/nextword helps us continue to make more shows. And now we don't have to worry about shoehorning all of our ideas into the Last Star in Hollywood podcast name. We can expand a little bit, do more things. So it's very exciting. And of course, the new show and everything we do here at the Last Star in Hollywood and Stars and Swords, everything we do here at Next Word is possible because of the wonderful support we've already received and the support we hopefully will continue to receive. Including the support from our superstar tier patrons, including Leslie Skipa, Louise in Dallas, Megan Lauder, and Phoebe. You guys, thank you so much. I would run a heist in Vegas with you anytime. Next week on the show, well, we dodged one bummer, but I'm super not optimistic about next week, you guys, because we are going to close out the 1980s with Oliver Stone's 1989 anti-war biopic, Born on the 4th of July, for which Cruise receives his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. I'm sure it's going to be very good. I'm sure it's going to be very grandiose. I'm sure it's going to be very Oliver Stone. So that'll be a fun
And then we'll just watch It's a Wonderful Life afterwards and get back on the Christmas
train. Round
train.
it out. Yes. Guys, thank you so much for listening. It has been, as always, a blast. We'll see you next week.